It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast here today. On behalf of myself and Ben Tages, we appreciate your presence so much. Well, on this episode, we're going to continue our mini-series exploring the key lessons learned since the publication of Repurpose, the Untold Story of Retirement in America back in 2017. Today, we're going to tackle this paradox in retirement planning, the psychology of wealth preservation versus enjoyment. We examine a common phenomenon among retirees who have spent decades building and maintaining their nest eggs, and rather than shifting to a mindset of strategic deaccumulation in retirement, many find themselves holding onto their wealth tighter than ever, often to fault or until it's too late to truly enjoy it. Taking insights from Bill Perkins' book, Die with Zero, Ben challenges this conventional thinking and presents a compelling case for why leaving substantial wealth behind when you die might not be the legacy you should strive for. Enjoy this episode. All right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Jared Sebesta joining you on another episode of Retire Repurposed, and we're going to continue this mini-series on lessons learned since publishing Ben's first book, Repurpose, the Untold Story of Retirement in America, back in 2017. And if you have missed out on the last several episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to these shows. It's really interesting because, as with any message that you have or platform that you build, it grows and evolves with time. And really, we've got a couple hundred episodes of this show under our belts. And as you do so, that message tends to grow and expand even more. And so we've spent the last several shows just dissecting further some of these ideas that were laid out into the show. Some of the reoccurring ideas that have come up, our view on money, our view on identity, and really what should we be doing with our time in retirement. If you've missed any of those shows, I encourage you to go back, find us on iTunes, find us on your favorite podcasting platform, and listen to some of those shows because they give you a really deep insight as to really what we stand for and how you can truly live out this season of retirement. Ben Tages joins me on the show now, and we are talking still about lessons learned. We're going to talk a little bit about money. I'm just kind of teeing it up, but it's probably not what you expect. But how would you like to kind of get into this idea of what we're going to talk about today?
Well, I think there's two things that our industry, meaning the financial world, if you look at wealth planning and wealth advice, where we mess up, Jared, in two big areas. I think we oversell how great retirement, or this idea of how society views retirement of a permanent vacation. We oversell how great that would be. And I think that's designed to get people to save as much as they possibly can, so that someday they don't have to work and can do nothing. Okay, so we understand, and I've talked about that on many shows, that doing nothing is rarely the answer. In fact, most people, it compounds the problems already in their life.
Sure.
So that's the first big one. I think the second one is where we're going to highlight today, is we also don't do a good job in our industry about helping people see that at some point in their life, their net worth should be going down. It is not ideal to save as much money as you can and then never spend it. We touched on this a little bit in my book, Repurposed, back in when it was first written, version 1. We touched on this, Jared, a little bit with the shark fin analogy in Repurposed. And what I found since writing that book, and we've learned since, is that that thought process of accumulating and then deaccumulating is such a miss in our industry. It seems that people want to just save, and it gets really, really hard to get people over the fact that now that you've saved it, you should start to spend it.
There's a lot to break down there, and we're going to dive deep into everything you talked about there, because you're really, I think, striking a nerve and perhaps a chord with people, because that is kind of the ultimate goal, not only have enough to financially walk away from work, but continue to grow it and amass more, even through your retirement years, tends to be the goal. Let's rewind the tape a little bit, because I think this is really good review, perhaps, for people that are new to our show. 100 years ago, retirement looked a lot different. You could argue retirement really wasn't even something that you strived for. It represents being old and tired, because that's actually the root word of retirement. You had the induction of Social Security back in the 30s, and then you started seeing an explosion of longevity, and financial firms started to leverage this and create financial products that we think have probably, we don't maybe think or know this, but like, or maybe thought about it, but like we think they've been around forever. The truth is, how you save and plan for retirement is a fairly new concept, and I think, in my opinion, has helped kind of change this mindset of more. What would be your opinion on that?
It's definitely made a difference in how people think about money, the utility of money, right? It's save it because it'll be more useful for you later in life.
Yeah.
There's some of that's healthy, Jared. There's some people that are hearing this are like, yeah, you should be saving. And you should be putting some money away for a rainy day. You should be planning accordingly. But I think when we put such an emphasis on this idea that I've got to have this massive nest egg so that I can retire and do nothing,
sure.
And we focus on that, even the financial products are usually, geared towards that idea. You see you see the advertisements. It's somebody sitting on a beach. It's somebody doing something that most of the time I don't see retireds even enjoying, Jared. So I think we definitely do a very poor job of showing people how to use their money, and most importantly, Jared, it's a feeling that, yes, I can start to decumulate. I think a huge part of our job is to help people overcome what we've talked about before, is the money disorder of that they think they don't have enough money to retire, and they think that they have to be prepared for every foreseeable risk out there. Yeah. And the reality of it is we have to look at how likely those risks are to happen, and yes, plan accordingly. But a bigger risk, I think, than many of those things is that you die with hordes of money, and you die with millions of dollars. And some people are like, well, that's good. You want to die with a lot of money. Well, no. In the way I look at it, you should actually die with a lot less than that.
Well, that's a great segue into a book that you and I have both read and impacted us both greatly, Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. I want to jump into that, but briefly, the reason why I brought up the whole financial product is because I just did some research on this. These everyday terms that we are so accustomed to, especially in this arena, Roth IRA, IRA, 401k. You know when, I don't know, putting you on the spot here, being a guy in the field, but you know when those were created?
The 80s?
It was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you and I were both alive in the 70s, barely, but like that's not that long ago. And these are like kind of everyday terms that we assume you should be pouring money into, and you should, but I think it plays into the psyche of like, by the way, you can't even take out your money out of some of these vehicles until a certain age. So again, it creates a psyche. I'm not against them. I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying it creates a mindset that's more. And even after you retire, how much money you have in there is really a goal. And that I don't think that was there 100 years ago.
Well, it wasn't there. And furthermore, I mean, even when you can start withdrawing and using these funds, to your point, continues to get extended longer and longer and longer. People are living longer.
Right.
And therefore there's some math sense to that. But I also just think, Jared, we push this idea of save for the rainy day. And sometimes I think you got to step back and say, when's the party? That's something Bill Perkins talked about.
Right.
He's like, so I don't mind saving and I don't mind putting money away, but there needs to be a goal. There needs to be one at some point, like you save for what?
Right.
For he says, when's the party? He talks about that in Japan. Japan's got a bigger problem than that than we do. Japan, you just continually, in fact, his book sells more copies there than here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've got some of it a problem, but over there, it's very much this cultural, we hoard, save, and then it goes to our kids. And they do the same, And the question is, which generation gets to really have the party and enjoy it?
Yeah.
And I would say that for many people here, in the United States, we do fall to that, where we try to, and there's something good about making the kids the future generations better off than what we have. We want our kids to do better, but I do think for a lot of our clients today, you have to first look to yourselves and say, okay, how I earn this money. I'm going to be the number one best steward of it, right? So I think we're preparing the next steward to continue that, but understand that you should be enjoying using the money, and the utility of money over time goes down.
Yeah. I want to dive deeper into this, and we're gonna dive into lessons from the book Die with Zero. I should have looked this up before we hit record, but there's actually somewhere back in the Old Testament. It wasn't a command, but it was really like God saying, once a year, take a tithe of what you earned, and it literally says, spend it on basically whatever you want. Now, there's a number of ways you could interpret that, but I think what God is saying is, to your point, like, we're not going to just spend everything. I mean, we should still be generous. We should still have grain in our storehouses, have an emergency fund, save for rainy days. All these things are fine. It's not pick one and do that one only. It's all of them. And if you find this scripture, it's really interesting. He's basically saying, spend some of your money, enjoy it. Don't spend it all. I mean, don't spend frivolously. Let me rephrase that. Don't spend frivolously, but like have some fun and understand the true essence of life. And I think that's what we're trying to get at here.
Well, I think that, anytime I look at money, it's specifically tied to the Bible. It can easily become a god. It can easily become an idol. That's why the love of money, even the word money, is capitalized, right? It's when people say money's evil. No, it's the love of it, right?
Sure.
So I think that I'm not sure what verse you're talking about, or what book, but I definitely think as I hear that, Jared, I come to money is a tool. So in that sense, some of your money can be used and should be used for enjoyment.
Absolutely.
God wants us to live in a place of abundance. He wants us to enjoy life. So if we get in the mode of just saving forever and not enjoying what we have, I think we miss really what God intended.
Yeah.
Right? God intended us to have abundance, to enjoy life, and money is a tool when used for experiences or even things that enhance experiences. I think, again, remember, money is a tool. It is the means. It is never the end.
Yeah, and I think intention comes along with that as well. If I'm buying things to try to fill a void or impress somebody, the intention's off. But to your point, I love that. If it's to create experience, to enhance the richness of my life or a relationship, that very same purchase or experience could look incredibly different. Let's dive into some of these lessons from Bill Perkins's book. He has an interesting perspective. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe he's a financial guy, so to speak. He writes it more from a different standpoint, but I think he understands kind of the real importance as to what life is all about. How would you articulate his message?
Yeah, I think some of his story was, of course, kind of what brought him to write this book. He talks about that. He says, well, he wrote the book really for himself. The constant reminder of don't get on autopilot and just do life without having a purpose and a reason for doing it. And most of the time, I think we best learn from our mistakes. And one of the mistakes he made, he kind of had he was early in his career on the stock exchange, and he was working really hard for a firm. I'm paraphrasing his story a little bit, but what stands out to me was that he was so busy earning and trying to grow his career and grow his net worth that at some point early in his career, before family, his friend that was also in the same job had decided he was going to go on a backpacking trip across Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
And Perkins decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to forego that opportunity because I got to stay here.
Work.
Yeah, and work. And when the friend came back, it was like, well, he came back with this super high value of experiences that could only happen when he was that age. The things that today, at this stage, Perkins says he would never do. But at that point brought high value to him. And ultimately what happened is that he kind of came back, and was Bill Perkins slightly ahead in his career at that time versus this guy? Well, maybe a little bit. But he talks about regret. And what I've seen in my career too, Jared, is people tend to regret what they did not do, not what they did. And that's another example of that, is he kept looking at this and saying, I was so worried. I was on this autopilot of, I got to save as much money as I can. I got to put all this money away, and I got to get wealth as fast as I can. And he forgot to stop and smell the roses. Forgot to stop and really enjoy that season of life. And that's a recurring theme in his book, right? It's valuing time and looking, really stop taking your time for granted.
Well, it goes back to the mantra that you have in your financial business of time, talent, time, talent, and treasure. You ask people which one's most important, you will always get the answer of time. To your point, though, I think that that's what you're bringing back some memories when I read Die with Zero now almost 2 years ago. But he talks about how his friend who took the week off and traveled in Europe, where they were in their career a year later was negligible because it didn't really make much difference, but yet he had that experience, and how we need to value our time with what we have. Talk about that for a second, because a lot of people wait to do those things until they retire, but the truth is you may not get the opportunity, or maybe you don't want to, and that's tragic.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier with, when you see the retirement brochures and the people are, sitting on the beach somewhere, or they're in a going on a hike somewhere. It's like, well, I'm 70 or 80. Yeah. The utility of money, the use of money for those things will not be the same. You will not want to use your money for the same things when you're that age. So, and it's something Bill Perkins talks about, is think about when you should be using your money and for what. And think ahead to retirement and think, okay, yes, that's fine to plan, but there's a lot of things I'm not going to be able to do when I'm 70. There's a lot of things that I can do now. Now, do I need all of this money to accomplish those things that I want to do then? Probably not. So start doing some of that stuff now when you can enjoy it.
I think it's a great mindset to have. Should you be building wealth for the future? Yes. Should it be all grind, pedal to the metal, full throttle, save, not live for years? Questionable. I think that you always need to keep that balance in mind, especially as you start to get older. I think that there's different seasons. I think in your 20s and 30s, yes, you should be building, but that doesn't mean, to Bill Perkins' point, you should never stop and smell the roses, so to speak.
Yeah, let's take this to the extreme, Jared. Let's say that if money has a value to everybody at different ages, right? So I would argue that let's look at a 0 or 1 year old child and a 100-year-old person. So the value, that's something Bill Perkins talks about, is the value for a newborn money, not really great, right? Same thing with somebody that's in their 90s. It's like that's something I've seen over and over in my career. Is like, people say, money just isn't what it used to be. It's just not as important.
Interesting,
right? So if you're 0 or 100, we know that money is not very important. At some point, there's this curve at which, in high school, it's fine, it's good to have, but then it probably peaks somewhere, right? When we have a family, and that's, unfortunately, for some of us, that's when we don't have as much because we're strained. We're being pushed to save as much as we can. We're trying to put as much for retirement as we can, and maybe we're foregoing some things that we should be doing with our family. Right. So again, I would ask people to look at the most important things to them, their values, and then back into what those cost, and try to figure out your own curve as to when you're going to need most of your financial resources. No. And if you can, die with 0. I mean, not literally, but
that's not what he's saying.
At least be okay with seeing your wealth climb. And then like we've talked about, your shark fin, it goes up, and then you begin to spend it down at some point in your life.
I think to your point, sometimes when you're in your 30s and your 40s, that's when you get pulled in the most directions, and you're getting pressure probably from a financial person to save more in your 401k or whatever. And again, I'm not suggesting those things are wrong, but those are also lots of times that is the prime time to have those experiences. As anybody that has growing children would know. I mean, how many people wouldn't die to go back and have those years, just even a moment or a day. And and I'm guilty as anybody is, but like you forego some of that to grind and build, and it's kind of a wake up call.
Well, it is. I think realizing that the season you're in is finite. Time, once it's gone, right? So I've had this same thing, as my daughters have aged, and I look back at how hard I worked to build this business when they were younger. I can't get that time back. But hey, when they're out of the house now, I do have enough time where I could continue to build wealth if I need to. So there is some regret there. Personally, Jared, I have regret there. But I think what I want most for people to hear is your time is finite. When you work, you are earning money so that you can get something. You are earning money so that you can pay for food, clothing, etc. But at some point, you have your basic needs met. And at some point, you have to look at it and say, okay, now what's the best use? Is the way I'm spending my money line up with my values? And for a lot of people, it just doesn't.
No. Well, I remember, this is funny because all of these memories are coming back in this book now because we're talking about that. I remember near the end of the book, he said, you will never do it perfectly. There's really no way to do it perfectly because we're missing a key piece of information in this whole equation. We don't know when we're going to die. The truth is that if we knew the date, we could perfectly engineer how we're going to spend our time and our money. We're not gifted with that piece of information. Probably good that we don't know that in some respects. But again, I think it comes back to this idea of really being in tune to time more so than money. And I think that's a great mantra to live with no matter what age you are.
Yeah, Jared, I think to that question, I know it's what people are going to say, well, yeah, it'd be easy if I knew exactly what I would need later. They tend to say things like, well, I know in my 80s or whatever, I might need all my money for the nursing home, or I might need it for what if I lose all my health insurance and I'm in the hospital and it costs $50,000 a day, and what if I need that? I think sometimes we overblow those potential costs down the road and the likelihood of them happening. That's another thing Bill talks about is look at you don't have to plan for every possible scenario like that. You have to plan with what you know today, and you have to plan the best you can. Right. And I would much rather have somebody that is slightly unprepared for the absolute worst case scenario, which is a tiny fraction of a chance going to happen.
Right.
Then that does not sound as good to me than somebody that lives their life on most scenarios a great life, and they've been able to enjoy the money they've saved. Yeah. I'd much rather see that than somebody that is far, far overplanned.
I'm smirking as you're saying this because I just had a conversation with my insurance agent. Insurance agents and lawyers are, and I'm no disrespect, I'm not against either one of these jobs and the services they provide. I have my own insurance, don't get me wrong. But like insurance agents are they will, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And I think if I was sold to cover every single thing, I would have no money left because I would just be insured. And I'm not suggesting that is not a good thing to have in the right scenarios. I'm not saying that at all. But to your point, there's no end to try to cover every single scenario. At some point, you need to find that balance on living, but yet having your ducks in a row in case something happens.
Yeah, I think most people err on the side of they become their own insurance agent. I even think Bill talks about that. It's like you become your own fear monger type, like this is the absolute worst case, this could happen, I've got to be prepared for it. I think that is very much something that I see more people probably struggle with. Back to the money disorder that we've talked about on our shows many times. It's you have to overcome that. You have to realize that it's okay to see that statement go down in value at some point, not just from a market cycle, but from hey, I'm actually using my money. It's a tool. That's why I've saved it. And I think that's really important.
We've got about 30 seconds left. We're going to do a part 2 on this next week. Give people a little taste as to how we're going to pick up this conversation.
Well, I think there's some distinct antidotes to this, Jared. I think there's things that we want people to be thinking about that will help overcome this feeling and this feeling of I can't quite part with the money, right? There's ways things you can think about, things that you can do in your situation to make sure that you don't end up being that person that someday dies with millions of dollars and you can actually enjoy what you've saved.
securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.